The Saturday market buzzes with life. Vendors call out their specials, children laugh near the fountain, and the smell of roasted peanuts mixes with the sweetness of fresh fruit. It's the kind of scene people think of when they imagine safety and community. Amid the crowd, Jasmine Carter, a poised black woman in her 30s, moves gracefully between stalls. She's dressed simply, jeans, a light jacket, her hair pulled back neatly, but her posture radiates quiet strength. She greets people with warm nods, her voice calm, her presence steady. But safety can be an illusion. Officer Ray Doyle, broad-shouldered with a temper barely contained beneath his uniform, watches from the corner. His jaw tightens as Jasmine laughs with a vendor. To him, her confidence is an offense. To him, her dignity is a threat. He steps forward, boots heavy on the pavement. "Hey!" he barks, loud enough for heads to turn. "You think you can just walk around here like you own the place?" Jasmine freezes, the market's hum dulling around her. "Excuse me?" she asks, steady but cautious. "I said," Doyle sneers, "watch yourself. People like you ought to remember where you stand." The crowd stiffens. Mothers pull children close. Vendors shift uncomfortably, torn between stepping in and staying silent. The air grows heavy, as if the whole plaza has stopped to listen. Jasmine lifts her chin. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Doyle smirks. "That's your problem." And then, in one sudden, shocking movement, he slaps her across the face. The sound cracks like a gunshot. Gasps ripple through the market. Jasmine stumbles, her hand flying to her cheek. For a heartbeat, silence reigns. The only sound is the flutter of a toppled banner in the wind. Then the murmurs begin. "Did you see that? He hit her. She didn't do anything." Phones rise instantly, cameras capturing every angle. Jasmine steadies herself, her voice low but clear. "You've just made the worst mistake of your career." Doyle scoffs. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before she can answer, a black SUV screeches to a halt at the edge of the market. The door swings open and Senator David Carter, her husband, steps out. The crowd erupts in whispers. "That's Senator Carter! He's here!" David cuts through the sea of onlookers, his face pale with fury. His tailored suit contrasts with the chaos, but his eyes are locked on Doyle, burning with a fire that silences even the loudest murmurs. "Did you just lay a hand on my wife?" His voice booms low and dangerous. Doyle falters. For the first time, his bravado slips. She was being disruptive. She was buying fruit," David snaps, his voice cutting like a blade. "And you dared put your hands on her?" Phones keep recording, streaming live. Within seconds, the footage begins spreading beyond the market. Social media lights up. Had justice. For Jasmine trends as the scene unfolds. Doyle's hand twitches near his belt, but the senator takes a step forward, his presence alone commanding silence. "You've not only disgraced this badge, you've disgraced this city." The crowd cheers, some chanting David's name, others demanding Doyle's arrest. Jasmine stands tall again, her cheek flushed but her spirit unbroken. She reaches for her husband's hand, grounding him, steadying the storm in his chest. "This isn't just about us," she whispers, loud enough for the cameras. "It's about everyone watching." David nods, his eyes sweeping the crowd. Then louder. "Justice will be served, and it starts now." The market explodes in applause. Doyle, red-faced and trembling, suddenly looks small against the tide of voices, the cameras, and the truth. And though the slap still stings, Jasmine knows the world has just shifted. This fight will not end here. The market is no longer a place of quiet shopping. It has become a stage. Phones stay raised, their tiny red dots blinking as they broadcast to thousands online. Every second the footage multiplies, shared, reposted, clipped with captions that spark outrage across the city. Senator David Carter stands tall, his hand still gripping Jasmine's. His fury is clear, but it is controlled, sharpened into words that cut deeper than any punch. "Officer Doyle," David says, his voice booming so all can hear, "you think your badge gives you the right to humiliate and assault people in public? You've just proven exactly why reform is overdue in this city." The crowd cheers, emboldened by his words. Someone yells, "Arrest him!" Another shouts, "He hit her for nothing!" The chants grow louder, coalescing into a rhythm. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Doyle's face burns red. He steps back, his hand twitching again near his belt. He mutters, "This is out of control." "No," David counters, his eyes locked on him. "What's out of control is an officer who thinks violence is his first response to dignity." Jasmine steadies herself, speaking for the first time since the slap. Her voice is clear, carried by conviction. The world saw what you did. You can't erase it, you can't silence it. This is bigger than me. It's about everyone you've ever treated like they don't matter. Applause erupts. Vendors bang on their tables, children clap, and strangers link arms, their unity forming a wall of defiance. Police sirens wail in the distance. More officers flood into the market, forming a line, shields raised. The tension thickens as onlookers step back, unsure if this will turn violent. David raises his hand, calming the crowd. "We are not here to riot," he declares. "We are here to demand accountability." The officers hesitate. Cameras stay locked on Doyle, who now looks more like a criminal than a cop. His smirk is gone, replaced by panic. A young woman in the crowd yells, "Check his body cam!" Others echo her. "Release the footage!" Doyle shakes his head. "That's classified. Procedure." But the people laugh bitterly. Procedure has always been the excuse. Suddenly, the police chief arrives, pushing through the line. Chief Reynolds is an older man, hardened by years of politics behind the badge. He scans the scene, the sea of cameras, the senator and Doyle standing alone, cornered by truth. "Officer Doyle," Reynolds says sharply, "hand me your badge and weapon." Gasps ripple through the market. Doyle freezes. "What? Chief, you can't— Now!" Reynolds snaps. His voice holds no room for argument. Reluctantly, Doyle removes his badge, his fingers trembling. He sets his weapon down with a metallic clink. For the first time, he looks small, stripped of the power that shielded him. The crowd cheers so loud the plaza shakes. Some cry, some embrace, some simply stand stunned, realizing they've just witnessed the impossible. A cop facing consequences on the spot. David steps forward, his voice steady but thunderous. "This isn't just justice for my wife. This is justice for every family silenced by fear. Today marks the beginning of real change." He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. His presence alone fills the plaza, his words carried by every phone recording. Jasmine squeezes his hand. She feels the heat of the slap still burning on her cheek, but it no longer feels like humiliation. It feels like a scar that will ignite change. "David," she whispers, "this is going to be bigger than us." "I know," he replies softly, his eyes sweeping the roaring crowd. "And we're ready." That night, the footage dominates the nation's news. Clips of Doyle's slap, Jasmine's defiance, David's fury, and the crowd's chants run on endless loops. Talk shows dissect it, commentators argue, hashtags explode. Had justice. For Jasmine, Senator Carter, end police abuse. Across living rooms, bars, and subway screens, America sees a story not just of violence, but of resistance, and of a woman who refused to bow her head. But in a dark corner of the city, Doyle sits alone, his badge gone, his career in ruins. His eyes burn with resentment as the news anchors call him a disgrace. He slams his fist on the table. This isn't over, not by a long shot. And though the city celebrates, a shadow begins to grow, because men like Doyle don't let go of power quietly. Morning light spilled across the city, but peace didn't follow it. The footage of Doyle striking Jasmine had already traveled farther than any politician's speech or courtroom argument ever could. It was everywhere. News channels, social media feeds, even billboards hijacked by activists who had replayed the slap in looping silence. Inside a modest cafe near the courthouse, Jasmine sat with David. The chatter around them was subdued. Every eye stole glances at the couple. Some smiled with gratitude, others with sympathy. A few simply whispered, pointing at the faint red mark still visible on Jasmine's cheek. "Are you sure about being out here?" David asked, concern flickering in his eyes. "The media frenzy's not going away anytime soon." Jasmine stirred her tea, her hand steady. "Hiding doesn't help anyone. If Doyle thinks I'll disappear, he doesn't know me at all." She leaned back, her gaze sharp. "What happened yesterday wasn't just about me. It was about every woman, every person of color who's ever been told to stay quiet. I won't be their silence." David nodded, pride mingled with worry. "And you won't face this alone." Across town, Doyle seethed in his apartment. His phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from angry strangers, headlines flashing his downfall, news alerts calling for his arrest. He slammed the phone onto the couch, his chest heaving. On the wall hung a framed photo of him shaking hands with Chief Reynolds. The sight made his blood boil. "That coward threw me under the bus." A knock at his door broke the silence. Two men entered, both ex-cops forced out of the force for misconduct. They carried the same bitterness Doyle now wore like armor. "They're turning you into the face of everything wrong with the system," one sneered. "You gonna take that lying down?" Doyle's fists clenched. "No, I won't be their scapegoat. I'll make them pay. Her husband, all of them." By noon, the city was divided. Outside City Hall, protesters gathered again. Half chanted Jasmine's name, waving signs calling for police reform. The other half, fewer but loud, carried banners supporting Doyle, claiming he was a victim of political theater. The tension between the two groups crackled like dry wood waiting for a spark. News vans lined the street. Anchors spoke breathlessly into microphones. The city remains on edge today after yesterday's shocking confrontation between Senator David Carter, his wife Jasmine, and disgraced Officer Ray Doyle. Inside the mayor's office, David stood with city officials. His voice was firm, echoing through the room. "If we don't handle this with clarity, the city burns. We need accountability, we need transparency, and we need it now." The mayor sighed heavily. "You've got the public on your side, Senator, but Doyle still has allies on the force. They'll fight this tooth and nail." "Then let them fight," David snapped, "because the people are watching." That evening, Jasmine appeared on a live talk show. The host leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Jasmine, the whole country has seen what happened. What do you want people to take from this?" Jasmine clasped her hands, her voice calm but resolute. "That no one is above the law, not even those who wear a badge. Doyle thought humiliating me would prove his power. Instead, he proved why power needs limits." The audience applauded, their cheers rolling through the studio. Online, clips of her words spread instantly, hashtags multiplying. But Doyle wasn't watching the applause. He was watching the hatred. In dim rooms lit only by TV screens, small groups of his supporters gathered, emboldened by his anger. He whispered promises of revenge, painting himself as the victim of a witch hunt. "Tomorrow," Doyle muttered, his eyes glinting with malice, "they'll see I'm not done." Back at home, Jasmine sat by the window, the glow of city lights reflecting in her eyes. David joined her, setting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You know this won't stop here," he said quietly. Jasmine nodded. "I know, but neither will I." For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy but strong. Outside, the city pulsed with unrest, its heartbeat quickened by anger and hope. And as the night deepened, one truth became clear. The slap was no longer just an act of violence. It was the spark of a war for justice that would test everyone's strength. The city did not sleep. By dawn, news choppers hovered low, their blades chopping through the sky above a restless plaza. On the streets below, chalk slogans sprawled across sidewalks. "Justice for Jasmine. End the abuse. Accountability now." Jasmine watched from the window of her apartment, her coffee untouched on the table. The mark on her cheek had faded, but the sting lingered, not just from Doyle's hand, but from the knowledge that others defended him. David entered the room, fastening his tie. His phone buzzed with messages he barely had time to read. "The mayor's calling an emergency session. They want me there. Half the council is terrified, the other half is emboldened." "Terrified of change," Jasmine murmured, her eyes still fixed on the restless streets. David approached, his voice gentler. "Yesterday made you a symbol. You didn't choose it, but people are rallying to you. That gives us leverage." She turned to him, her resolve hardening. "Then we use it." Across town, Doyle huddled in a dingy bar with a cluster of bitter ex-officers. Their voices were low, but their anger was sharp enough to cut glass. "They're dragging you through the mud," one growled. "They already fired me," Doyle spat, gripping a glass so tightly his knuckles whitened. "Stripped my badge, humiliated me in front of the whole country." "They made you the villain," another chimed in. "We can't let them win." Doyle's eyes flickered with rage. "She thinks being married to a senator makes her untouchable, but I still have friends on the force, and friends know how to make noise." The men exchanged glances. In the shadows of the bar, resentment had become strategy. By mid-morning, City Hall was surrounded. Protesters packed the square, their chants echoing off stone walls. News anchors reported live, describing it as one of the largest demonstrations in the city's history. Inside, the council chamber buzzed. Politicians argued fiercely, some demanding Doyle's arrest, others warning that giving in to mob rule would erode trust in the police. David rose when his turn came. His voice carried over the bickering. This isn't about mob rule. It's about accountability. Officer Doyle slapped my wife in public. Your constituents saw it live. If this council refuses to act, you're telling the people that the law bends for those in uniform. That is not justice. That is rot." The room fell silent. Cameras caught every word, and the clip would be replayed for days. Meanwhile, Jasmine walked into a community center a few blocks away. Inside, residents had gathered. Neighbors, activists, teachers, clergy, all buzzing with the same nervous energy. As she entered, the room hushed. People rose to their feet, some clapping, some simply staring at her like she was proof that their struggle wasn't invisible. Jasmine took a deep breath. "I didn't come here as a senator's wife. I came here as someone who was humiliated in front of you all. But this fight isn't about me alone. It's about every injustice that's been ignored. It's about making sure our children grow up in a city where dignity isn't optional." The room erupted in applause, people chanting her name. An elderly woman stood, tears in her eyes. "We've been waiting for someone to say that." By afternoon, the two sides collided in the streets. Supporters of Doyle, emboldened by his allies, arrived with banners calling him a patriot. Their chants clashed with protesters demanding reform. Police formed lines, shields raised. The air grew heavy with the threat of chaos. Jasmine, escorted by community leaders, approached the barricade. Cameras followed her every step. She didn't shout, she didn't wave a fist, she simply stood, her presence quiet but unyielding. Her voice was clear, though the noise was deafening. "We are not here for war, we are here for justice, and justice cannot be silenced." The crowd quieted, as if her words cut through the fog of anger. But Doyle was watching from a rooftop nearby, his jaw tight, his heart pounding. Seeing her stand there, commanding the streets without fear, ignited something dangerous inside him. "This isn't over," he muttered. That evening, the footage of Jasmine at the barricade went viral. Hashtags soared again, commentators praised her composure, and even critics admitted her strength was undeniable. But in the quiet of their apartment, Jasmine and David knew the storm wasn't finished. David placed a hand on her shoulder. "Today drew the line in the sand. Tomorrow, they'll try to cross it." Jasmine looked at him, her voice steady. "Then tomorrow, we'll be ready." The city hadn't felt this volatile in years. By sunrise, the clash of voices outside City Hall was already streaming live across national networks. Hashtags climbed faster than anyone could count. The air buzzed with both electricity and dread. Jasmine sat at the edge of her bed, lacing her shoes with deliberate calm. She could hear David on the phone in the next room, his voice firm, clipped, measured. Every call was another meeting, another negotiation, another plea for calm. When he entered, his tie still undone, she caught the tension in his face. "They're calling in reinforcements," he said. "The mayor's office wants the National Guard on standby." Jasmine frowned. "That'll only inflame things." "I know." David rubbed his forehead. "But Doyle's supporters are planning something. The intelligence is vague, but it's not good." Her jaw tightened. "Then we can't just wait for them to act." Across the city, Doyle gathered in a warehouse with a handful of loyalists. They were a bitter mix. Ex-cops, fringe activists, men who saw accountability as betrayal. The air stank of stale beer and resentment. "They humiliated you, Ray," one spat. "Made an example of you. They think they can strip me of my badge, of my dignity," Doyle growled. He slammed his fist on the table, rattling empty bottles. "But I'm not done. They'll see what happens when you corner a man." Another leaned in, eyes gleaming. "We could disrupt their rallies, send a message." Doyle's lips curled into a smile that never reached his eyes. "No, we don't disrupt, we dominate. They want a symbol? We'll give them one." That afternoon, Jasmine walked into a packed church hall, every pew filled with anxious faces. Reporters lined the back wall. She stepped up to the podium, feeling the collective weight of expectation pressing on her. "I'm not here to tell you to stay silent," she began. "I'm here to tell you that your voice matters. Yesterday, one man's violence showed us why accountability is not optional, it's essential. And every time you stand up, every time you speak truth, you're part of building that accountability." Applause thundered through the church. A young man stood and asked, "What if they come for us? What if they fight back harder?" Jasmine paused, her voice steady when she answered, "Then we stand taller, because justice has always been a fight worth having, and we will not let fear decide our future." Outside, however, Doyle's followers had gathered. They waved flags, shouted slurs, and held signs painting him as a martyr. Police held a shaky line between them and the church doors. Reporters rushed out, capturing the confrontations. The footage split screens across the country. Inside, Jasmine speaking with calm resolve. Outside, Doyle's supporters chanting with clenched fists. It was the perfect image of a city divided. By evening, the situation exploded. Doyle himself appeared outside the barricades, pushing through the crowd. His presence ignited a frenzy. Cheers from his side, gasps from the other. He pointed toward the church. "They want to silence me," he shouted. "They want to destroy every man and woman who dares to wear a badge." The crowd roared. Inside, Jasmine was ushered toward a side exit, but she stopped short. "No, if he's outside, I'm not sneaking out the back." David's eyes widened. "Jasmine?" She shook her head. "If I hide, he wins. If I face him, people will see who truly stands for justice." Moments later, Jasmine stepped onto the church steps. The noise surged like a tidal wave. Cheers, boos, chants, insults. She lifted her chin, calm against the chaos. Cameras locked onto her instantly. Doyle froze, his face contorted between anger and disbelief. "You think you're better than me?" he shouted. "You think being married to a senator makes you untouchable?" Jasmine's voice carried over the din. "No, Doyle. What makes me untouchable is the truth, and the truth is, you assaulted me, you abused your badge, and you are not the victim here." The crowd erupted. Supporters of justice cheered so loudly the sound rattled the windows. Doyle's own allies faltered, their chants losing rhythm. For the first time since his fall, Doyle looked uncertain. Later that night, footage of Jasmine standing on the church steps circulated worldwide. Headlines called it "the moment the narrative shifted." Commentators replayed her words, praising her composure. But in the shadows of his warehouse, Doyle replayed the same footage with clenched fists. His voice was a low growl. "She thinks this is over. It's not. It's only just begun." The morning after Jasmine's defiant stand at the church steps, the city felt different. It wasn't calmer, it was sharper, like a knife balanced on its edge. News stations replayed the confrontation in endless loops. Hashtags demanding justice trended nationwide. Even late-night hosts weighed in, praising Jasmine's composure. But for every cheer, there was a counterpoint. Doyle's supporters flooded message boards, painting him as a patriot betrayed. Their anger grew louder, and their threats darker. At the Carter apartment, David sat at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone. His brow furrowed as message after message rolled in. Some offered gratitude. Others dripped with venom. "Listen to this," David muttered, his jaw tight. "We know where you live. She won't be safe." Jasmine, dressed for another day of meetings, calmly poured coffee. "Fear is what they want. If we hide, they win." David shook his head. "This isn't just political theater anymore, Jasmine. Doyle is dangerous, and his people are desperate." She met his eyes. "So are we. Desperate for change. That's the difference." Across the river, Doyle paced the warehouse floor like a caged animal. His followers sat around folding tables littered with coffee cups, cigarette butts, and maps of the city. "They're turning her into a hero," Doyle growled. "Every time she opens her mouth, my name sinks lower." One of the men leaned forward. "Then we drown her voice out. We crash their rallies. We disrupt their meetings. We remind this city who's in charge." Doyle's smile was bitter. "No, I won't just disrupt. I'll destroy their narrative." He pointed to Jasmine's face on a newspaper spread across the table. "She's their symbol. If she falls, so does their movement." The men nodded grimly. Plans began to form. That afternoon, Jasmine attended a community forum in a high school gymnasium. Families packed the bleachers, teachers spoke about protecting their students, and activists outlined reforms. The energy was hopeful but tense. Everyone knew Doyle's shadow loomed nearby. When Jasmine rose to speak, silence fell. "Yesterday, I stood on church steps while a man who once wore a badge shouted at me, trying to scare me back into silence. He failed. And today, I stand here again to tell you, he will keep failing, because our voices together are louder than his rage." The crowd erupted in applause. Students raised homemade signs. Parents clapped until their hands hurt. Cameras captured every second, broadcasting her words far beyond the gym walls. But outside, Doyle's men gathered. They wore hats pulled low, hoodies zipped high. They lingered at the edges of the parking lot, watching, waiting. One muttered, "She's untouchable right now. Too many eyes." Doyle, leaning against his truck, lit a cigarette. His eyes burned. For now. Back at City Hall, David faced a different kind of storm. Council members argued over whether Doyle should be charged formally or whether they should wait for the Attorney General's office to act. David slammed his fist on the table. Waiting is complicity. The city saw what he did. If we stall, we tell every officer they can assault citizens with no consequence. The mayor sighed, trapped between fear and politics. If we push too fast, his supporters will riot. They already are, David shot back. The question is, do we lead with courage or with fear? The cameras caught his words, and within hours they were replayed on news loops alongside Jasmine's speech. The Carters weren't just defending themselves anymore, they were becoming the face of a movement. That night, Jasmine sat on the balcony, the city lights shimmering below. David joined her, exhaustion etched into his face. "Do you ever wish we could just step away?" he asked softly. She looked at him, her expression steady. "Every day. But stepping away means handing victory to men like Doyle, and I can't live with that." David took her hand, squeezing gently. "Then neither can I." Meanwhile, Doyle scrolled through his phone in the dim warehouse light. Video after video showed Jasmine, her speeches, her strength, her defiance. Each clip chipped at his pride, fueling his rage. He turned to his men. "They think she's untouchable because of cameras and crowds, but cameras turn away, crowds go home. And when they do," his words trailed off into silence, heavy with implication. The men exchanged uneasy looks. Even they could feel the line Doyle was crossing. But none of them dared stop him. The city was bracing for something bigger, and both sides knew it. Jasmine was climbing higher as a symbol of hope, while Doyle was sinking deeper into resentment and rage. The question wasn't if the collision would come, it was when. The city's heartbeat was no longer local. It pulsed across the nation. Every major network carried updates about Jasmine and David Carter. Talk shows debated the slap, the rallies, and Doyle's fall from grace. Editorials praised Jasmine's calm, her voice becoming a rallying cry for accountability. At the Carter home, the phone never stopped ringing. Journalists wanted interviews. National organizations wanted her to speak at rallies. Advocacy groups asked her to headline campaigns. David paced the living room, juggling calls, his voice clipped but firm. "We can't do everything. If we spread ourselves too thin, we lose focus." Jasmine, seated calmly at the dining table, flipped through a stack of letters from strangers. Each one told a story of humiliation, fear, or loss at the hands of people in power. She read them quietly, her face tight with empathy. "We can't do nothing either," she said softly. "These voices need to be heard. If we don't carry them forward, who will?" Across the river, Doyle glared at the television in the warehouse, each segment cutting deeper. He had become a symbol too, but the wrong kind. "Look at this garbage," he snarled, tossing a beer can against the wall. "She's a saint now? A hero?" All she did was cry foul because she couldn't handle discipline. One of his men shifted uneasily. "Ray, the tide's against us. Maybe it's time to lay low." Doyle's eyes snapped to him, blazing with fury. "Lay low while she destroys everything I worked for? While she parades around like she's the voice of the people?" He slammed his fist on the table. "No, this isn't over. It's war." The word hung heavy, even among men already steeped in resentment. Meanwhile, Jasmine and David arrived at a packed auditorium at the State University. Thousands filled the seats, many holding signs with her name. Cameras broadcast live, streams watched by millions nationwide. As Jasmine stepped to the podium, the room fell silent. "I didn't ask to be here," she began, her voice carrying strength without theatrics. "But life has a way of showing us who we are. One man tried to humiliate me, but what he didn't understand is that his hand sparked something bigger than me, bigger than him, bigger than this city." Her words flowed, deliberate and sharp. She spoke of justice, of reform, of the dignity every citizen deserved. And as she spoke, the crowd leaned in, not as spectators, but as participants in something larger. By the end, the room erupted. Students chanted her name, professors applauded, and online, hashtags soared again. Back at the warehouse, Doyle watched the stream. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He muttered under his breath, "She's poisoning them, turning everyone against me." Another man spoke cautiously. "Or maybe she's just telling the truth." The room went still. Doyle's glare cut through the air like a knife. "Get out!" he hissed. The man hesitated. "Ray!" "Get out!" Doyle roared, slamming a chair across the floor. The man left quickly, the echo of the slammed door punctuating the silence. The others stared at Doyle with a mix of fear and unease. That evening, David returned home with news. The governor wants to meet. He thinks your voice could help shape new legislation. Jasmine leaned against the counter, the weight of it all pressing on her shoulders. I'm not a politician, David. I never wanted to be one. You don't have to be, he replied gently. You just have to be who you are. That's why people are listening. She sighed, staring out the window at the restless city below. If I take this step, it's not just speeches anymore. It's a fight on every level. David placed his hand over hers. Then we fight, together. But in the shadows, Doyle's bitterness hardened into resolve. He no longer spoke of reclaiming his career. He spoke of vengeance. They think they've won, he told his dwindling circle of followers. But I'm not done. She's not untouchable. Nobody is. One man asked, "What are you planning?" Doyle's smile was cold, chilling. Something that will remind them who Ray Doyle is. As night settled, Jasmine prepared for another day ahead. The city outside buzzed with chants, arguments, and anticipation. She whispered to herself, steady and unyielding, "This isn't about me anymore. It's about all of us." The words steadied her heartbeat. She knew the road was about to grow darker. But she also knew there was no turning back. The governor's office was grand but tense, every conversation buzzing with urgency. Jasmine and David were ushered into a conference room where advisors shuffled papers and whispered about polls, protests, and public safety. The governor leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Mrs. Carter, Senator, we're at a crossroads. The state is watching, the nation is watching. Your voice, Jasmine, is stronger than any speech I could give." Jasmine took a breath, steady but thoughtful. "I'm not interested in politics. I'm interested in justice. If my voice helps, then I'll use it. But don't mistake me for a pawn in a campaign." The governor smiled, though his eyes betrayed caution. "That's exactly why they believe you, and exactly why we need you." David placed a hand on Jasmine's arm. "We'll do what's necessary, but on our terms." Outside the polished walls of power, Doyle's circle grew smaller but sharper. The warehouse meetings had thinned, but those who remained were the most dangerous. The ones who nodded at every venomous word he spoke, the ones who saw violence as salvation. "They're parading her across stages like she's the savior of the world," Doyle snarled, pacing. "Meanwhile, we're the ones treated like criminals for doing our jobs." One follower asked, "So what do we do?" Doyle stopped, his eyes glinting with a wild fire. "We remind them, not with words, with action." The men shifted, uneasy but silent. No one dared challenge him now. That evening, Jasmine appeared on a primetime national interview. The studio lights were bright, the cameras sharper than ever. Millions tuned in. The host leaned in. "Jasmine, people are calling you a symbol of change. Some say you've become the face of accountability in America. How do you respond to that?" She inhaled slowly. "I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be a reminder that dignity is not negotiable, that justice isn't optional. What happened to me is happening to others every day. If my story forces people to finally listen, then I'll keep telling it." Her words echoed across the country. Social media exploded. Hashtags surged again. And in homes from coast to coast, viewers leaned forward, seeing not just a victim, but a leader. But Doyle was watching too. The flickering light of the TV painted his face in shadows. Each word she spoke tightened the knot in his chest. "She's mocking me," he muttered. "Every time she opens her mouth, she spits on everything I stood for." His last loyalists sat in silence, the weight of his obsession heavy in the air. Finally, Doyle slammed the remote down. "If the system won't silence her, I will." The room went cold. Back in the city, Jasmine and David returned home after the interview. Exhaustion clung to them, but adrenaline kept them awake. David poured 2 glasses of water, his hand trembling slightly. "Do you realize what you did tonight? You just stepped onto the national stage. There's no going back." Jasmine nodded, staring out the window at the flashing lights below. Reporters were camped outside their building, their cameras glowing like stars. "I know," she said quietly, "and I'm ready." Because this fight stopped being about us the moment Doyle raised his hand. It became about every family, every citizen who ever felt powerless. David set the glass down and kissed her forehead. "Then we'll carry it together." But not everyone saw the moment as triumph. In online forums, Doyle's supporters seethed. Threats multiplied, Calls for retribution spread in coded messages. Law enforcement monitored but struggled to keep up. The lines between free speech and dangerous plotting blurred, leaving everyone uneasy. One eye-chilling post simply read, "She won't be speaking much longer." The next day, Jasmine spoke at a rally outside the courthouse. Thousands attended, holding candles and banners. The atmosphere was peaceful but charged, a chorus of voices singing for justice. Jasmine stepped to the microphone, her voice resonating through the night. "We are not here to divide. We are here to demand dignity. And dignity belongs to all of us." The crowd roared with approval, chants echoing through the city streets. But among them, Doyle watched from the shadows, his hood pulled low. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of his twisted resolve. He whispered to himself, unheard over the noise of thousands. Soon. The morning after the rally, the city buzzed with cautious optimism. Newspapers splashed Jasmine's image across their front pages. "Voice of justice shakes the nation." Commentators compared her to civil rights icons. For once, the headlines weren't just about fear, they were about possibility. But while the world applauded, danger crept closer. At their apartment, Jasmine scrolled through messages of support, teachers thanking her, parents urging her to keep speaking, veterans writing that her courage reminded them of battles they'd fought. Each note lifted her, but beneath the warmth, she felt the weight of unseen eyes. David entered, holding his phone with a grim expression. "The threats are escalating. Law enforcement flagged several credible ones last night. They're assigning extra patrols to the building." Jasmine set the letters down. "Let them patrol, but I won't be silenced, not now." David hesitated, then nodded. He knew better than anyone that her resolve was iron. Across town, Doyle's obsession had boiled past reason. His followers had dwindled to only a handful, but those who remained were dangerous, men who had long since abandoned the idea of law, who craved chaos as vindication. Doyle leaned over a map of the city, his finger tracing routes around City Hall and the courthouse. "She thinks she's untouchable because of cameras and speeches, but cameras blink, crowds scatter. All it takes is the right moment." One of his men, younger and jittery, shifted uneasily. "Ray, this is going too far. Protests are one thing, but—" Doyle's glare cut him off. "You don't walk away from a war halfway through." The younger man swallowed hard but said nothing. The others looked on, silent accomplices to a plan they couldn't yet name. Later that day, Jasmine met with a coalition of community leaders in a library basement. The air was thick with determination and exhaustion. A pastor leaned forward. "We've made progress, but Doyle's people are still out there, stirring fear. How do we counter that?" Jasmine clasped her hands. "By refusing to stoop to their level. They want chaos. We answer with clarity. They want intimidation. We answer with unity. Every time they try to break us, we'll show them we are unbreakable." Her words drew nods, murmurs of agreement. Someone whispered, "She doesn't just talk like a leader, she is one." But Jasmine wasn't thinking of titles. She was thinking of survival. Meanwhile, Doyle prowled the edges of that very neighborhood. From the driver's seat of a beat-up truck, he watched the library doors, his grip on the steering wheel white-knuckled. Through the windshield, he saw Jasmine exit with a small group, laughing softly with the leaders, her bodyguards close but not smothering. For a flicker of a second, Doyle's face softened. Not with mercy, but with something darker. He muttered to himself, "Look at her. Untouchable. But everyone bleeds." That evening, David spoke to a room full of reporters at City Hall. His words were sharp, political, meant to push legislation forward. But Jasmine stayed home, curled on the couch, flipping channels that all carried her face. She turned the TV off, seeking silence. For a moment, she let herself breathe, her eyes drifting to the window where city lights blinked. Then, faintly, she noticed a car idling too long near the curb. Her stomach tightened. She pulled the curtain closed, her mind racing. Was it just nerves? Or was Doyle closer than she dared admit? Across town, Doyle sat at the same bar he had haunted for weeks, the television above the counter showing clips of Jasmine's speeches. Patrons watched quietly, their eyes darting between the screen and the disgraced officer in their midst. Doyle slammed his drink down. "They'll cheer her until she's queen of the damn country. And where will I be? Forgotten, replaced, erased." One of his followers leaned close. "Then don't let them erase you. Make them remember." Doyle's jaw clenched. "Oh, they'll remember. They'll remember me, and they'll remember her. Together, written in fire." Back at the Carter apartment, Jasmine joined David on the balcony. The night air was cool, the hum of the city constant. "Do you ever wonder if this ends?" she asked quietly. David looked at her, his expression weary but resolute. "It has to. The question is how, with victory or with scars." She leaned into him, her eyes scanning the city below. She could feel it, something moving, something closing in. But she also knew one truth with certainty: she wouldn't back down. And in a warehouse lit by a single flickering bulb, Doyle whispered to his dwindling band of loyalists. "The time's coming," he said, his voice low and certain. "Soon she won't be able to hide behind microphones and cameras. Soon she'll see me again." The men shifted uneasily, but Doyle's grin cut through the shadows. For him, this wasn't politics anymore. It was obsession. The city's pulse quickened with every passing day. The rallies had grown larger, the chants louder, the headlines sharper. For Jasmine, every speech was a lifeline for people who had been silenced too long. For Doyle, each word she spoke was a dagger twisting deeper into his pride. On a gray morning, Jasmine prepared to leave for another forum, buttoning her jacket while David sorted through papers at the kitchen table. His phone buzzed endlessly, calls from aides, council members, and security officials. "2 more threats came in overnight," David said, his voice tight. "Anonymous emails. One mentioned the church where you spoke. The other said, 'The next rally will be your last.'" Jasmine's hand paused on her jacket. For a moment, the weight of the words pressed heavy against her chest. Then she exhaled, steady and firm. "If I stop now, Doyle wins. I won't give him that." David met her eyes, conflicted but resigned. He knew her resolve was stronger than fear. Meanwhile, Doyle's hideout had become a cage of paranoia. His few remaining followers sat in silence as he scrawled notes across a whiteboard. Rally dates, locations, security patterns. "They think cameras will protect her," he muttered. "But cameras can't stop what's coming." One man finally spoke. "Ray, maybe it's time to let it go. The world's moved on. You're only digging deeper." Doyle turned slowly, his gaze piercing. "Moved on? They erased me. They worship her while they spit on everything I built. Let it go? No. I'll make them remember who I am." The man swallowed hard, realizing there was no reasoning with him. At City Hall, David met with law enforcement leaders, pressing for action. "Doyle is escalating. He's not just angry, he's planning something. If you don't move now, you'll be explaining why you let a tragedy happen." The police chief leaned back, frustration in his voice. "We're monitoring him, Senator. But without hard evidence, our hands are tied." David slammed his fist on the table. "Then find the evidence. Because if anything happens to my wife, to this city, it'll be on you." The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew Doyle was circling closer. That evening, Jasmine walked onto the stage of a packed community center. The room was alive with energy. Families, students, workers, all looking to her as a beacon. She gripped the microphone. "They say change is impossible. They say the system can't be fixed. But every one of you here tonight proves them wrong. You are the proof that courage is stronger than fear." The audience erupted in cheers, chants of her name echoing off the walls. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe they were untouchable, that unity was enough. But in the crowd, Doyle stood at the back, hood pulled low. His eyes never left her. When the rally ended, Jasmine was escorted to a side exit. Her security detail guided her into a waiting car. As the door shut, she caught a fleeting glimpse of a familiar face in the shadows. For a split second, her stomach clenched. It was him. "Drive," she whispered, her heart pounding. The car pulled away, but the image burned into her mind. Doyle wasn't just watching anymore. He was closer. Later that night, Jasmine and David sat in their living room, the city lights flickering outside. "I saw him," Jasmine said quietly. "At the rally. He was there." David's face hardened. "Then it's not just threats anymore. He's stalking you." "We can't let fear dictate what we do," Jasmine replied. "If we back down, the message dies." David leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "This isn't just about a message anymore. This is about survival." Across town, Doyle sat alone in his truck, staring at the steering wheel. His followers had drifted away, leaving him with only his rage. He whispered into the silence, "She thinks she can humiliate me, but soon she'll know what it feels like to fall." His hand brushed against the glove compartment. Inside lay the tools of his obsession: maps, photos, and something heavier, something final. As dawn broke, the city stirred awake, unaware of how close the shadows had come. Jasmine sipped her coffee, steadying herself for another day of speeches and fights. David watched her closely, his mind racing. He knew Doyle wouldn't stop until something broke. And in that quiet morning, one truth settled over them both. The battle was no longer about words, it was about survival, and only one side would endure. The city awoke to headlines that seemed to hum with anticipation. Jasmine Carter to lead statewide rally. Flyers plastered telephone poles, social media feeds overflowed with countdowns, and buses from neighboring towns promised to bring supporters in droves. The rally wasn't just an event anymore. It was a test of the city's soul. At breakfast, David scrolled through his phone, frowning at a new flood of threats. Listen to this. The rally will be her last. They're not even hiding it anymore. Jasmine set down her cup calmly, though her eyes were tired. They've been trying to scare us since day one. If I stop now, every voice that trusted me will feel betrayed. We go forward. David rubbed his temples, frustration lacing his words. I don't care about politics, Jasmine. I care about you. Doyle isn't just angry, he's unhinged. I can feel it. She reached across the table, placing her hand on his. Then stand with me, because if we falter, he wins twice. Meanwhile, Doyle stood before a mirror in the dingy warehouse bathroom. His reflection was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling with a mix of adrenaline and hate. He splashed water on his face, gripping the sink until his knuckles whitened. This ends today, he muttered. No more speeches, no more cameras. She silenced me. Now I silence her. On the floor beside him lay a backpack. Inside, a crude plan for chaos. One of his last loyalists lingered near the doorway. Ray, are you sure about this? If you cross this line, there's no coming back. Doyle snapped his head toward him, eyes blazing. I crossed that line the day she turned me into a joke. The man hesitated, then stepped back into the shadows, unwilling to share in Doyle's madness. By late afternoon, the rally began. The courthouse steps overflowed with people, families holding signs, students chanting, veterans in uniform standing shoulder to shoulder. Media crews lined the edges, cameras sweeping across the sea of faces. Jasmine arrived flanked by her security team, her heart pounding as chants of her name echoed like thunder. She stepped onto the stage, raising a hand for quiet. Today we stand not just for justice, she began, her voice carrying across the plaza, but for dignity, for every mother, every child, every worker who has been told they don't matter. This is your answer. You do matter. The crowd roared. But at the fringes, Doyle moved like a shadow. His hood was pulled low, his backpack slung tight. He pushed through the bodies, each step bringing him closer to the stage. David stood at Jasmine's side, scanning the crowd. His instincts prickled. Something was wrong. He leaned toward her, whispering, "Stay sharp. I don't like this." Jasmine kept her focus, her words rising stronger. We will not bow to hate. We will not cower to fear. Together, we are stronger than the darkness that tries to silence us. The audience erupted again, but David's eyes caught a flicker of movement. Doyle, only yards away, his hand slipping into the backpack. Security! David barked, pointing. The agent surged forward, cutting through the crowd just as Doyle yanked something out. A flare canister, the kind that spat smoke and chaos. He lit it, the red blaze hissing upward, and the crowd screamed in panic. People surged backward, shoving, stumbling. Chaos rippled like fire. On stage, Jasmine's security rushed to shield her, but she raised her voice above the din. Stay calm! Do not run! We are not afraid! Her words, amplified through the speakers, steadied the crowd. Parents clutched children tighter, but the stampede slowed. The chants of fear began to die down. Doyle, enraged that his disruption wasn't enough, lunged forward, shouting, "You'll never silence me!" The agents tackled him to the ground, the flare clattering onto the pavement, still spitting smoke. Doyle thrashed, veins bulging in his neck. She ruined me. She ruined everything. The cameras caught it all, the face of a man unmasked by his own obsession. Minutes later, Doyle was dragged away in cuffs, screaming threats into the chaos. The smoke cleared, the crowd trembling but intact. Jasmine stepped back to the podium, her voice fierce, unwavering. This is what hate looks like when it's cornered. But we are not cornered. We are rising. And no flare, no threat, no man filled with rage can stop us. The crowd erupted again, louder this time, stronger, their voices carrying over the courthouse square like a wave. David looked at her, both terrified and proud. "You could have run. You could have let them whisk you away." She shook her head, fire in her eyes. "And give Doyle the victory? Never." That night, footage of the failed attack dominated every screen in America. Commentators called Jasmine fearless, her refusal to flee a symbol of resilience. The image of Doyle screaming as he was dragged away became the defining picture of a man undone by his own hate. But for Jasmine, it wasn't triumph. It was clarity. The battle wasn't over. Doyle might be in custody, but the system that bred him was still alive, and she was more determined than ever to confront it head-on. The courthouse square was still buzzing long after the flare smoke had cleared. Reporters swarmed the scene, microphones thrust into faces, cameras replaying the moment Doyle was dragged away again and again. The image had already gone viral. Doyle, the once proud officer, screaming as he was pinned to the ground. Inside their apartment later that night, Jasmine and David sat together in silence, the weight of the day pressing on them. Jasmine's hands trembled as she sipped tea, her eyes staring blankly at the TV, where her own face filled the screen. "Fearless, brave, a hero," the anchor proclaimed. David muted the sound. "They see the victory, but they don't feel the cost." Jasmine nodded slowly. "It didn't feel like victory when I saw him in the crowd. It felt like staring into a void that still hasn't closed." David reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "But you didn't flinch. You didn't let him steal the moment. That matters more than you know." Across the city, Doyle sat in a holding cell, his hair matted, his eyes wild. He muttered under his breath, replaying every moment of humiliation. Guards kept their distance, wary of his outbursts. "You think she won?" Doyle spat suddenly, his voice echoing off the walls. "She hasn't won anything. They'll see. They'll all see." His words were incoherent to some, but to others in the same block, men with their own grudges, they sounded like prophecy. The next morning, national headlines screamed with urgency. "Attempted attack at Justice Rally. Jasmine Carter faces hate but stands tall." Clips of her refusing to flee played on a loop, cementing her image as unshakable. Talk shows debated her rise. One commentator said, "She's not just an activist anymore, she's a movement." Another added, "The attack made her stronger." Doyle tried to silence her, and instead, he gave her the loudest microphone in America. In homes across the country, families who had never heard her name now spoke it with admiration. But Jasmine felt the burden of the spotlight. At breakfast, she scrolled through her phone. Thousands of messages of support, but also new waves of threats. One in particular froze her blood. "He may be locked up, but there are others. Watch your back." She handed the phone to David silently. He read it, his jaw tightening. "We need more protection. I'll call the governor today." Jasmine sighed. "I don't want to live surrounded by guards, David. That's not freedom." David looked at her firmly. "It's survival." Later that day, Jasmine stood on the steps of City Hall, addressing the press. Cameras clicked furiously as she spoke. "Yesterday, hate tried to silence us, but today, we are louder. We are not victims of fear. We are authors of change. What you saw was not the end of this fight, but the beginning." The crowd erupted with cheers. Her voice carried across the plaza, strong and unbroken. Inside the police department, however, tensions boiled. Some officers muttered that Doyle had embarrassed them all, while others whispered that he had only said out loud what some still believed. The divide deepened, exposing cracks in a system already under fire. The chief addressed his staff bluntly. "Doyle is finished. Anyone who thinks they can follow his path will find themselves out of a job or behind bars. We will not tolerate another disgrace." But in quiet corners, resentment still simmered. That evening, Jasmine appeared on a national broadcast, her face calm but resolute. "I don't stand here for myself. I stand for every person who has been told they don't belong, who has been pushed aside, who has been silenced. Doyle's attempt to break us only proved how much stronger we are together." Her words resonated across the country. In cities and small towns, watch parties formed, neighbors gathering around screens to hear her. For the first time, her voice wasn't just local or state, it was national. But not everyone celebrated. In dim basements and online forums, Doyle's arrest became fuel. Angry posts labeled him a martyr, claiming he had been sacrificed by the system. Supporters vowed revenge, their words laced with venom. One post read simply, "If Doyle falls, others will rise." Back at home, Jasmine sat with David on the balcony, the city lights flickering below. "Do you think it ever ends?" she asked quietly. David looked out at the skyline, thoughtful. "Hate doesn't vanish, but it can be beaten back, and right now you're the one holding the line." Jasmine leaned into him, exhaustion finally settling over her. She whispered, almost to herself, "Then I'll hold it as long as I can." And in his cell, Doyle smiled faintly through cracked lips. The world might have seen him fall, but in his mind, the war wasn't over. He whispered into the dark, "She hasn't seen the last of me." The rally had ended. Doyle was behind bars, but the city still felt like it was holding its breath. Streets once filled with chants now buzzed with uneasy whispers. Jasmine's image dominated every screen, yet in the shadows of the internet, her name was twisted into threats. At the Carter apartment, David scrolled grimly through his tablet. "Listen to this. Forums calling Doyle a patriot, blaming you for his downfall. Some even talk about finishing what he started." Jasmine set down her coffee, her face calm but resolute. That's what happens when truth exposes darkness. It doesn't disappear, it fights back. David shook his head. "This isn't just hate speech anymore. These are organized calls to action. They're watching you closer than ever." Jasmine stood, pulling her coat from the chair. "Then let them watch. They'll see I'm not backing down." Meanwhile, Doyle sat in his cell, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. Guards ignored his muttering, but inside his mind, he was orchestrating. His words had become sermons among his dwindling but fervent followers. One night, he leaned against the bars and whispered to a visitor who had slipped through the cracks of supervision, "You know what to do. Don't let them forget me. Make them feel my shadow even from here." The visitor nodded silently, sliding a folded piece of paper into his pocket before vanishing into the night. Days later, Jasmine was invited to speak at a major university auditorium. Thousands of students packed the hall, eager to hear her story. She stood on the stage, the lights bright on her face, her voice echoing. "I didn't choose this fight," she said, scanning the young faces before her. But silence was never an option. Doyle tried to strip me of dignity in public. Instead, he exposed his own weakness, and every time hate tries to rise, we will rise louder. The audience erupted in applause. Phones lit up as her words spread live across social media, trending within minutes. But outside the auditorium, a black SUV idled too long. Inside, two of Doyle's sympathizers sat in silence, their eyes locked on the glowing entrance. One muttered, "She's the reason he's locked up. She's the reason he's humiliated." The other gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Then tonight we make a statement." After the event, Jasmine walked toward the exit with her security detail, David trailing close behind. The night air was cool, the crowd buzzing with excitement. Reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs exploded like sparks. Suddenly, the SUV roared forward, screeching to a halt inches from the crowd. Doors flung open, men in masks rushing out. Chaos erupted, screams, shouts, the crush of bodies scattering. Jasmine froze, her instincts sharp, but her guards pulled her back. One of the men shouted, "This is for Doyle!" before tossing something metallic into the crowd. The object clattered onto the pavement, a smoke grenade. Thick plumes of gray spiraled upward, swallowing the square in panic. David shielded Jasmine as the guards closed ranks. "Get her inside!" one barked, pulling them toward a nearby building. The air filled with coughing, cries of fear, the wail of alarms. Through the haze, Jasmine glimpsed the masked men retreating, their message already made. Doyle's shadow still lingered. Within minutes, police swarmed the scene, dragging away suspects, restoring order. The grenade had been harmless, but the fear it created spread like fire. On the ride home, Jasmine sat silent, staring out the window. David finally spoke. "They won't stop. As long as Doyle breathes, his poison spreads." She turned to him, her eyes burning. "Then I'll keep speaking louder than their poison." That night, footage of the attempted attack dominated national news. Some anchors called it an act of terrorism, others a sign of a broken system. Hashtags exploded again. Stand with Jasmine, no more hate, justice over fear. Public opinion shifted further. Donations poured into community programs in her name. Invitations arrived from Washington, asking her to testify before Congress about civil rights reform. Her story was no longer just the city's, it was America's. But in his cell, Doyle smirked as he heard the news from a guard's radio. He closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "Good. They remember. They'll always remember." The guard slammed the bars with his baton. "Shut up, Doyle!" But Doyle just laughed softly, the sound chilling in its calm. Back at home, Jasmine stood on the balcony, the city lights flickering below. David joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Standing up that day, refusing to walk away?" Jasmine shook her head slowly. "No, because if I had walked away, Doyle would have won the moment he touched me, and I refuse to let him, or anyone like him, define what this city stands for." She looked out at the horizon, her voice steady. "This isn't about me anymore. It's about every person who needs to know hate doesn't get the last word." David kissed her temple, pride and worry mingling in his eyes. "Then we'll keep fighting. Together." The city stretched before them, scarred, shaken, but still standing. And so were they. The invitation arrived in a thick white envelope stamped with the seal of the United States Congress. David found it first, pulling it from the stack of morning mail. His brow furrowed as he read. "Jasmine, it's from Washington. They want you to testify about police reform and civil rights oversight." Jasmine set down her coffee, eyes narrowing as she reached for the letter. The words were formal, respectful, but heavy with expectation. She would be flown to the Capitol, given a platform before lawmakers, broadcast nationwide. "This isn't just another speech," David said carefully. "This is the stage where history gets written." Jasmine read silently, her hand steady even as her heart raced. "Then we can't afford to say no." News of the invitation spread within hours. Networks ran with headlines. Jasmine Carter to testify in Washington. Talk shows dissected the significance. Some praised it as a long overdue step toward accountability. Others sneered, calling it political theater. At a diner across town, two of Doyle's sympathizers sat hunched in a booth, glaring at the TV. One slammed his fist on the table. "They're turning her into a saint. Doyle rots in a cell, and she gets paraded through the Capitol like royalty." The other leaned in, whispering, "Then we don't wait for Doyle. We take matters into our own hands. Washington is where we make our move." Back in her apartment, Jasmine prepared for the trip. Security briefings intensified, agents outlining routes, contingencies, safe houses. David sat across from her, his face tight with worry. "This isn't just about you anymore," he said softly. "If they can rattle you there, in front of the entire nation, it'll undo everything you've built." Jasmine looked up, her eyes steady. "Then I'll stand taller, because if I falter, every survivor, every victim, every voice counting on me will think they have to falter too. I won't give Doyle that victory." David's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't argue. He simply reached across the table and held her hand. The flight to Washington was tense. Jasmine sat by the window, staring at the patchwork of clouds below. Across the aisle, her security team kept watch, their eyes scanning every passenger. David dozed lightly, but his hand never left hers. As the plane descended toward the Capitol, Jasmine felt a mix of dread and determination. She had stood on stages, faced down mobs, survived Doyle's shadow. But this was history waiting to judge her. Meanwhile, in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, 3 of Doyle's loyalists gathered around a cluttered table. A laptop streamed the news of Jasmine's arrival, anchors detailing her schedule. "She's speaking tomorrow morning," one man said, scrolling. "Capitol building. Security will be heavy." Another smirked. "Security doesn't matter. Crowds matter. Crowds are chaos, and chaos is opportunity." The third man pulled a duffel bag onto the bed, unzipping it to reveal masks, smoke bombs, and radios. "Then tomorrow, chaos is exactly what we bring." The next morning, Jasmine walked the marble steps of the Capitol, flashbulbs exploding around her. Supporters lined the sidewalks, holding signs of encouragement. Detractors shouted insults from across barricades, their words sharp but drowned by chants of justice for all. Inside, the halls echoed with history. Portraits of leaders passed staring down as she was guided to the chamber. David walked beside her, whispering, "This is bigger than Doyle, bigger than the city. This is for the country." Jasmine nodded, her jaw set. When her name was called, she rose and stepped forward. Cameras turned, microphones tilted, lawmakers leaned in. She adjusted the microphone, her voice calm but firm. "My name is Jasmine Carter. I am not a politician. I am not here for power. I am here because hate tried to silence me and failed. What happened in my city is not an isolated moment. It is a symptom of something deeper, something systemic. And if we do not face it, if we do not change it, then Doyle will not be the last. The room was silent, the weight of her words pressing on everyone present. She continued, her voice rising. This is not about vengeance. This is about dignity. About every citizen's right to walk the streets, to stand in a courtroom, to live without fear of those sworn to protect them. Applause rippled through the chamber, growing louder until it thundered. Outside, however, chaos brewed. The three men from the motel had merged with the crowd, their masks hidden in their jackets, smoke bombs ready. One muttered, "When she comes out, the cameras will see everything burn." But they didn't know the FBI was watching. A tip had come through. Someone loyal to neither Jasmine nor Doyle, but unwilling to see blood spilled on the Capitol steps. As Jasmine wrapped up her testimony, federal agents quietly moved through the crowd. By the time she stepped outside, cheers rising around her, the three men were already in cuffs, their plan foiled before it began. That night, Jasmine sat in her hotel room, the glow of the Capitol dome shining through the window. David placed a hand on her shoulder, pride softening his voice. "You didn't just testify. You reminded this country what courage looks like." Jasmine looked out at the dome, her reflection faint in the glass. "Then I'll keep reminding them, until no one like Doyle can ever rise again." The morning after Jasmine's testimony, America woke to a different tone. Newspapers splashed her image across their front pages. One fist on the podium, her eyes steady, her voice frozen mid-sentence. The caption under one headline read, "She spoke for us all." On talk shows, political commentators replayed clips from her testimony. A conservative analyst grudgingly admitted, "Agree with her or not, Jasmine Carter commanded that room." A progressive voice countered, "She didn't just command the room, she changed the conversation." In classrooms, teachers played snippets of her words. On factory floors, workers gathered around radios. At home, families discussed what it meant to live in a country still haunted by Doyle's shadow. Jasmine had spoken from her city's pain, but now the nation claimed her as their own. At the hotel, Jasmine scrolled through the endless flood of messages on her phone. Thousands of strangers thanked her for standing up. Survivors of police abuse shared their stories, many for the first time. Donations surged to community organizations in her name. But mixed in with the support were fresh threats. Messages that dripped with venom. "We'll silence you yet. Doyle was right. You'll pay." David leaned over her shoulder, his face hardening as he read. "It's worse now. The bigger you get, the more they want to tear you down." Jasmine set the phone aside, her voice steady but tired. "That's how I know I'm being heard." Meanwhile, in a federal penitentiary hours away, Doyle sat slouched on his bunk. The prison television had played Jasmine's testimony live. He'd watched every second, his jaw tightening as her words rose in power. The guard walking past smirked. "Guess she's more famous than you now, Doyle." Doyle's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of his bunk. "She won't last. They'll get tired of her. And when they do, I'll still be here." But inside, Doyle felt a sting he couldn't shake. Jasmine had turned his attack, his hatred, into fuel for a national movement. He had meant to silence her. Instead, she had grown louder than ever. Back in Jasmine's hometown, the streets swelled again, but not with fear. People marched in solidarity, holding candles, chanting her name alongside calls for justice. Murals of Jasmine appeared on brick walls, painted by local artists. One showed her standing tall with the words, "You cannot silence truth." David watched the news coverage of the march, shaking his head in awe. "Do you realize what's happening? You've become more than a prosecutor, you've become a symbol." Jasmine, gazing at the mural on the TV screen, whispered, "Symbols are powerful, but they can also be targets." That evening, Jasmine was invited onto a primetime news special. The host leaned forward, asking the question everyone wanted to know. "Jasmine, after everything you faced, Doyle's harassment, the threats, even an attempted attack, why keep going? Why not step back for your own safety?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Because this was never about me. If I step back, then every person who's been pushed down will think they should step back too. And if Doyle taught us anything, it's that silence doesn't protect you. It only feeds the ones who want you gone." The audience in the studio erupted in applause. Online, her words spread like wildfire, but outside the glow of cameras, shadows lingered. In a cramped basement across town, Doyle sympathizers gathered around a laptop, replaying the interview with seething anger. "She's untouchable now," one spat. Another leaned forward, eyes cold. "Nobody's untouchable. We don't need to hurt her to silence her. We just need to break her image." The group nodded slowly, the beginnings of a plan taking shape. Later that night, Jasmine and David sat together on their hotel balcony, the Capitol dome glowing in the distance. The weight of the day hung heavy, but the night air was calm. "Do you ever wonder," David asked softly, "what life would have been like if none of this had happened? If Doyle had never laid a hand on you?" Jasmine thought for a long moment, the city lights flickering below. "Sometimes, but then I think about the voices I've heard since, people who never spoke until now. If it hadn't been me, maybe those voices would have stayed silent." David turned to her, his voice firm. "You didn't ask for this fight, but you were meant for it." Jasmine exhaled slowly, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll carry it until the fight is done." The next morning, the headlines were even louder. Analysts said Jasmine's testimony could mark the beginning of sweeping reform bills. Lawmakers who had once avoided the topic now called for action. But in a dark cell, Doyle smirked at the ceiling, whispering, "She thinks this is over. She has no idea what's coming." The morning sun spilled across the Capitol dome as Jasmine prepared to return home. Her testimony had been broadcast coast to coast, her words etched into the national consciousness. But with new influence came new danger. David was the first to notice it. As he scrolled through news sites at breakfast, his expression darkened. "Look at this," he said, turning the screen toward Jasmine. Headlines blared, "DA Carter under scrutiny, past cases questioned." Another read, "Anonymous sources claim Jasmine Carter abused authority." Jasmine frowned. "None of that's true." David shook his head. "Doesn't matter if it's true. It's coordinated. Someone's feeding lies to the press." Jasmine leaned back, the weight of the smear sinking in. "Doyle's people." Across the country in that dim basement, Doyle's loyalists sat hunched over laptops, typing furiously. One sneered, "People don't need proof. They just need doubt. If we smear her name enough, her supporters will hesitate. That hesitation is our victory." Another nodded, "And Doyle will know it was us." By midday, the rumors had spread like wildfire. Talk radio hosts seized on the accusations, speculating about her past. Conspiracy forums flooded with doctored images, fake case files, even fabricated witness statements. On social media, the hashtags that once praised Jasmine now battled against new ones. #Carter corruption, #fake hero. Jasmine's phone buzzed nonstop. Supporters begged her not to let the lies go unanswered. Critics demanded her resignation. The noise was deafening. That evening, Jasmine met with her legal advisor in the hotel conference room. Stacks of papers littered the table, copies of the false claims, screenshots of doctored documents. The advisor shook his head. "Classic disinformation. 90% is baseless, but they've mixed in just enough to make it look real. If you ignore it, it festers. If you fight it, you look defensive." Jasmine rubbed her temples, exhaustion creeping in. "So what do I do?" The advisor looked her square in the eye. "You do what you've always done. Stand in the light. Don't let them dictate the story. Tell the truth louder than their lies." Later that night, Jasmine appeared on a live interview. The host wasted no time. "Ms. Carter, you've become a national figure overnight, but serious allegations have surfaced. Abuse of power, questionable convictions. How do you respond?" The studio fell silent, camera zooming in. Jasmine inhaled, steadying her voice. "Let me be clear. These claims are false. They are not mistakes from my past. They are fabrications designed to silence me. And you should ask yourself, why now? Why, after I testified before Congress, do these stories appear? Because hate doesn't vanish when exposed. It lashes out. But truth endures." The audience erupted in applause. Online, her words trended again. Truth endures." But in his cell, Doyle smiled. "She's fighting the fire, but every second she does, she's distracted. We win either way." He leaned back on his bunk, whispering to no one in particular. The higher she climbs, the further she has to fall. Back in her hometown, Jasmine returned to a hero's welcome. Crowds lined the streets, cheering as she walked through City Hall. But amid the celebration, she noticed the shadows. Cameras snapping too close, whispers in the crowd, murmurs of doubt. After the event, a young woman approached her hesitantly. "Ms. Carter, my brother was arrested years ago. People online say you mishandled his case. Is that true?" Jasmine's heart tightened. She reached out, placing a hand gently on the woman's shoulder. "No, it's not true. They want you to believe I've failed so you won't believe I can fight. But I promise you, I've never forgotten who I serve." The woman nodded slowly, her doubt easing, but Jasmine knew the seeds had been planted. That night, David confronted her on the balcony. "How long can you keep this up? They're tearing you apart piece by piece." Jasmine looked out over the city skyline, her voice steady. "As long as it takes, because this fight was never about me. It was about every voice they tried to silence. If I fall, I fall standing." David wrapped his arms around her, whispering, "Then we'll stand together." The smear campaign raged on, but so did Jasmine's resolve. For every lie, she told the truth louder. For every attack, she stood taller. And somewhere in the dark, Doyle watched his influence ripple outward. His hands might have been bound, but his shadow stretched further than ever. Jasmine knew the storm was far from over, but she also knew this. She had faced hate before and refused to bow. And now, with the eyes of a nation upon her, she would not falter. By the time the week ended, the smear campaign was everywhere. Cable news debates, angry blogs, and whispers in grocery store lines. Yet something unexpected began to form beneath the noise. People who refused to let the lies define Jasmine. In Chicago, a group of college students painted a mural of her with the words, "Truth has no chains." In Atlanta, church leaders gathered for a prayer vigil in her name. And in Los Angeles, activists organized marches carrying signs that read, "Stand with Jasmine." David watched footage of the gatherings from their living room, his eyes wide. This isn't just support. This is a movement. Jasmine, seated across from him with a folder of legal documents, finally allowed herself a small smile. "They can smear me all they want, but they can't smear what I represent." Meanwhile, in a dim cell, Doyle listened to the buzz of a smuggled radio. Reports of rallies filled the static. His face twisted with contempt. "They make her out to be Joan of Arc," he muttered. Another inmate on the bunk above laughed bitterly. "Sounds like she's winning." Doyle's eyes flared. "Winning? She's nothing without me. I created her. If I hadn't slapped those cuffs, she'd still be a nobody. Remember that." He clenched his fists, the veins in his arms straining. "She thinks she can bury me, but she's standing on a trapdoor, and I hold the lever." The smear campaign shifted tactics. Instead of fabricating stories about her past, Doyle's loyalists began targeting her supporters. A community organizer in Boston woke to death threats in his inbox. A teacher in Texas who praised Jasmine found her car vandalized. Online, trolls doxed students who painted her mural, spreading their personal information. The attacks were designed to isolate her, to make people afraid of standing beside her. But it backfired. The organizer held a press conference defiantly declaring, "You will not silence me." The teacher's school rallied around her, repainting her car with bright colors and the words, "Hope wins." And the students turned their mural into a citywide project, dozens of walls now covered with Jasmine's face. The tide was rising, and it wasn't in Doyle's favor. Inside her office, Jasmine met with local leaders. The room buzzed with tension and determination. A pastor spoke first. "We're not here to beg for protection, we're here to offer it. Our communities will rally, our congregations will march, and our voices will not be silenced." A union leader added, "If they want to smear you, we'll drown them out. We'll show them there are more of us than them." Jasmine leaned forward, her voice steady. "I don't want this to become about me. This has to be about the system. If I become the story, the reforms die when I do." An elder community member replied softly, "Sometimes change needs a face. Whether you want it or not, you've become that face." That night, Jasmine walked alone through the city streets, hood pulled low, blending with the crowd. She passed by a group of teenagers clustered around a phone, watching clips of her testimony. One boy said, "Man, she's braver than anyone I've seen. She's not scared." Another shook his head. "Nah, she's scared, but she still does it. That's the point." Jasmine felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to step forward, to tell them the truth, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move through it. But she stayed in the shadows, listening, her heart heavy with responsibility. Back in prison, Doyle wrote feverishly in a notebook, every word laced with venom. He passed the pages through hidden channels, messages that would later appear online as manifestos under anonymous accounts. "They worship her now," he scrawled. "But worship turns to weariness. Keep pressing, keep doubting. Build the cracks until the whole wall falls." When a guard confiscated one of the notes, Doyle only smiled. "You think locking me in here matters? I'm already out there. My voice is louder than these walls." The next day, Jasmine appeared at a massive outdoor rally in her city. Tens of thousands gathered, waving banners, chanting her name. News helicopters hovered overhead, broadcasting the spectacle live across the nation. As she stepped onto the stage, the roar of the crowd washed over her. David stood behind her, his hand briefly brushing hers for strength. She raised the microphone, her voice carrying across the square. "They tried to smear me. They tried to silence me. But this isn't about me. It's about us. It's about a future where no one fears the people sworn to protect them. And I promise you, no smear, no lie, no shadow will stop us." The crowd erupted, the chant swelling. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Tears stung Jasmine's eyes, but she stood firm, her heart steady. She didn't just have supporters anymore, she had an army of truth. The rally footage dominated the news cycle for days. Networks replayed Jasmine's words with dramatic music, framing her as the voice of a new generation. Editorials in major newspapers declared that the Carter Doctrine could become the foundation for sweeping reform. In Washington, politicians took notice. Senators who once avoided the issue of police abuse suddenly shifted their tone. One veteran lawmaker admitted on live TV, "The tide of public opinion has turned. We either stand with reform or we get swept away." Behind closed doors, meetings buzzed with talk of legislation. Bills long buried in committee were dusted off. Jasmine's name was mentioned in every conversation, not as a prosecutor from her city, but as a national leader. David, watching from their living room, shook his head in disbelief. "You're not just in the fight anymore, you're shaping it." Jasmine sat quietly, her face serious. "That means the attacks will get worse." She wasn't wrong. In an abandoned warehouse 2 states away, Doyle's most loyal followers gathered under dim lights. Their leader, a broad man with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, slammed a newspaper on the table. Jasmine's face stared up from the front page, smiling at the rally. "She's untouchable now," one muttered. The tattooed man snarled. "Nobody's untouchable. Doyle gave us a mission: tear down her image, break her power. If the people see her stumble once, they'll stop chanting her name." Another loyalist slid a folder across the table. Inside were schedules, flight plans, hotel bookings, all public information scraped from the internet. "If she thinks she's safe in the spotlight, she's wrong. We'll strike where the cameras are brightest." The group nodded, a dangerous determination in their eyes. Back in her city, Jasmine met with her growing coalition. Pastors, union leaders, students, and even small business owners filled the conference room. The air buzzed with energy and urgency. A young activist stood. "The marches are growing, but so are the threats. People are scared, but they're also ready. We need a national day of action, something no one can ignore." A teacher chimed in. "Yes, but we have to keep it peaceful. If violence erupts, they'll use it to discredit everything." Jasmine raised a hand, calming the room. Her voice was firm. "We will march, we will speak, and we will not give them the chaos they crave. They want fear. We'll give them discipline. They want division. We'll give them unity." The room erupted in applause, her words striking the balance between fire and focus. Meanwhile, Doyle sat in his cell, scribbling notes on scraps of paper. A guard glanced in and muttered, "What's the point, Doyle? You're never getting out." Doyle smirked, sliding the note into a hidden crease in his mattress. "You don't get it. I don't need to be out. My voice already is." He thought of the warehouse meetings, of the loyalists who hung on his every word. He pictured Jasmine on stage, commanding crowds, and whispered, "The higher she climbs, the further she falls." The following week, Jasmine traveled to Washington again, this time for a private roundtable with lawmakers. The meeting room gleamed with polished wood and American flags, but the mood was tense. A senator leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, your testimony inspired millions. But we need more than words. We need specific reforms. Oversight, accountability, funding. What do you propose?" Jasmine met his gaze without flinching. Independent review boards for police misconduct, federal funding tied to community trust, and laws that protect whistleblowers instead of punishing them. The room buzzed with murmurs. Some nodded, others frowned, but no one dismissed her. Afterward, David pulled her aside. "Do you realize what you just did? You gave them a blueprint. If they act on it, you'll go down in history." Jasmine exhaled slowly. if they act on it. That's the test. Outside the Capitol, supporters cheered as she exited, but among them, unnoticed, stood two of Doyle's loyalists. They whispered to each other, one clutching a hidden radio. "She's too powerful now. We don't wait. Next rally, we make our move." The other nodded grimly. "Then the world will see she's not invincible." That night, Jasmine returned to her hotel, exhaustion etched into her face. David poured her a glass of water, watching her closely. "You're carrying the weight of the nation," he said softly. "But don't forget you're human. You can't save everyone." Jasmine looked out at the glowing dome of the Capitol, her reflection faint in the glass. "Maybe not. But if I don't try, then Doyle wins, and I can't let that happen." In the streets, the movement grew louder. Candlelight vigils spread from city to city. Murals multiplied. Hashtags trended daily. Jasmine's name was no longer just a headline, it was a rallying cry. But in the shadows, plans were being laid. Doyle's prison walls might have held his body, but his reach was alive and dangerous. The stage was set for a clash, not just of voices, but of futures. And Jasmine knew the storm was coming. The morning dawned gray, the air thick with anticipation. Across the nation, cities stirred as people prepared for what had been dubbed the Day of Action. It wasn't just a march anymore, it was a demonstration of unity, discipline, and resolve. In Washington, the streets filled long before sunrise. Students carried handmade signs, veterans in uniform stood shoulder to shoulder, and families pushed strollers through the swelling crowd. From rooftops and balconies, banners unfurled. Truth endures, stand with. Jasmine, justice now. Inside a quiet hotel room overlooking the Capitol, Jasmine tied her hair back with deliberate care. The reflection staring back at her in the mirror looked calm, but her chest felt heavy. She knew this day would define the movement, for better or worse. David stood behind her, straightening his tie. "You're ready," he said firmly. Jasmine's lips curved in a faint smile. "I hope so, because if we falter, they'll never let us forget it." By mid-morning, the march began. The sound of thousands of footsteps echoed like a heartbeat through the city. Chants rose, rhythmic and powerful, rolling like waves down avenues lined with cameras. Jasmine walked at the front, flanked by pastors, union leaders, and community elders. She carried no megaphone. She didn't need one. Her presence alone drew eyes, her calm defiance anchoring the sea of faces around her. The world watched live. Networks cut away from regular programming, streaming every step. But not everyone in the crowd came for peace. In a shaded alley, two of Doyle's loyalists adjusted their jackets nervously. One whispered, "Today's the day. We create chaos, people panic, and the cameras catch it all. Her image shatters." The other clutched a backpack, his voice sharp. "We wait for the chant to hit its peak. Then we throw the smoke bombs. Let them think it's violence. That's all it'll take." Neither noticed the plainclothes officers shadowing them from across the street, eyes locked on their every move. As the march wound toward the Capitol steps, Jasmine felt the ground vibrate beneath her feet, not with fear, but with unity. She raised her hand and the chant subsided into silence. Tens of thousands waited, breath held, the city itself seeming to pause. She stepped onto the makeshift stage, microphone in hand. "Look around you," she began, her voice steady, carried on speakers to every corner of the plaza. "They tried to smear us, they tried to divide us, but today we show them we are one." Cheers roared, then hushed again as she continued. "This movement isn't about hate, it isn't about revenge, it's about justice. Justice for those silenced, justice for those forgotten, and justice for those yet to come." The crowd erupted, chants rising again, louder, stronger, unstoppable. In the alley, the loyalists tensed. "Now!" one hissed, fumbling with the backpack. But before he could pull the pin on the smoke bomb, two plainclothes officers grabbed him, slamming him against the wall. The other tried to run but was tackled within seconds. The march continued, undisturbed, the attempted sabotage swallowed by the sea of voices and the vigilance of those protecting it. Back on stage, Jasmine closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the moment. When she opened them again, her gaze swept the crowd, and for the first time since this fight began, she felt not just resistance, but victory within reach. "They will say we are dreamers," she said, "but today proves we are doers. They will say we are weak, but today proves we are strong. And they will say we are divided. But today," She lifted her hand, pointing toward the endless waves of people. Today proves we are united. The chant returned, rolling like thunder. United! 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 In his cell, Doyle listened on a contraband radio, his jaw locked tight. He heard the chants, the cheers, the speeches echoing across the airwaves. His fist slammed against the wall. This isn't over, he growled. She thinks she's won, but she hasn't felt the real fight yet. But even as he spat the words, the fear he'd never admit crept in. For the first time, he realized Jasmine's movement wasn't just about her anymore. It was bigger, stronger, harder to kill. As the march ended peacefully, families lingered, taking photos, singing songs, and hugging strangers. News anchors declared it one of the largest demonstrations in modern history. Commentators debated what it meant for the future, but none could deny the power they had just witnessed. Later that night, back in her hotel, Jasmine sat with David by the window, watching the city lights glow. Exhaustion clung to her, but so did hope. David placed a hand over hers. Today wasn't just history, Jasmine, it was proof. She tilted her head. Proof of what? That they can try to smear you, silence you, break you. But as long as people believe, they can't stop you. Jasmine leaned her head against his shoulder, a weary smile crossing her face. Then we keep going, because tonight wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The morning after the day of action, Washington felt different. The streets that had thrummed with chants were quiet now, littered with signs and candles left behind like sacred offerings. Yet the silence was not emptiness. It was the echo of something larger, something that could not be swept away. News anchors called it historic. The largest peaceful demonstration of its kind in decades, one declared. Editorials filled front pages. The Carter effect, a turning point in justice. For once, the narrative wasn't about chaos or scandal, it was about unity. In a Senate chamber, lawmakers who had long avoided the issue sat stiff-backed as cameras rolled. One senator cleared his throat, glancing nervously at the packed gallery. We cannot ignore what we witnessed yesterday. The people have spoken, and their voices demand action. Applause broke out, not just from the gallery but from senators themselves. For the first time, bipartisan momentum surged behind reform. In her hotel, Jasmine sat cross-legged on the bed, scrolling through footage on her tablet. She watched herself on stage, the sea of faces roaring back at her. She still struggled to see what others saw. Not a woman, not even a prosecutor, but a symbol. David walked in with coffee. You look like you're studying for an exam. Jasmine smirked. In a way, I am. Every word, every gesture, it's going to be dissected. I can't afford a misstep. He sat beside her, offering the cup. You've already passed the test. They believe in you. Her smile faded into seriousness. Which is why Doyle will come harder. He won't accept losing quietly. In a different part of the city, federal agents processed the two loyalists caught with smoke bombs. One of them, sweating under interrogation lights, finally cracked. It wasn't our idea, he spat. We're just the hands. Doyle, he's the voice. Even from prison, he gives the orders. The agent leaned forward. And what's his next move? The man hesitated, his voice dropping. He said, if the movement keeps growing, he'll make it bleed. He's not finished, not by a long shot. The agent left the room grim-faced, dialing a secure line. We've got a problem. Doyle's still pulling strings and he's planning escalation. Back in her hometown, Jasmine's supporters held a victory rally. Streets were alive with music, murals, and speeches celebrating the march. Children painted her face on sidewalks in chalk, families carried candles, and pastors declared the beginning of a new era. But amid the joy, whispers of fear still lingered. Some asked, what if the backlash turns violent? Others wondered, what happens when the cameras move on? Jasmine knew those fears well. She addressed them directly during her speech that night. We cannot let victory make us complacent, she said, her voice strong. Yesterday was not the finish line. It was the starting line. They will try harder now. They will throw lies, threats, and shadows at us. But we will not stop. Because justice isn't a moment, it's a movement. The crowd erupted, voices chanting her name. Yet even as she stood tall, Jasmine's eyes flicked to the edges of the crowd, scanning the shadows, knowing Doyle's influence lingered there. Inside his cell, Doyle listened to the coverage with seething rage. His hands trembled as he gripped the radio, hearing Jasmine's words replayed again and again. He muttered to himself, pacing like a caged predator. She thinks she's untouchable, but symbols can be shattered, and when she falls, they all fall with her. That night, he penned another manifesto, venomous and calculated, smuggled out through hidden channels. Its message was simple: strike when hope is highest, break them when they believe they've won. In Washington, Jasmine was invited to meet with the defense secretary, who had quietly supported her cause. In the stately office adorned with flags, the secretary shook her hand firmly. What you did yesterday wasn't just a march, it was a signal to the world. America showed it still has the strength to face its own demons. Jasmine replied softly, but demons don't vanish because of one march. They regroup, they strike back. The secretary nodded gravely. Which is why we'll be ready. And you won't fight alone. That night, Jasmine returned to her hotel. David was already asleep, but she stood at the window, gazing at the Capitol dome glowing under the night sky. Her reflection stared back at her, weary yet resolute. She whispered to herself, "This isn't about me anymore. It's about every person who never had the chance to fight back. If Doyle wants a war, he'll find me ready." She closed the curtains, heart steady, mind sharp. The movement was no longer fragile. It was alive, roaring, undeniable. And though Doyle's shadow stretched long, Jasmine knew light had begun to spread wider. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, victory felt possible.